I think we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for getting here. We're going to start right now with a subcommittee until we have a quorum. If we look at the agenda real quick, we have a few things today. Minutes, proposal for latchkey increase, monthly financial report, and a capital funds budget. I am also going to ask the committee for a recommendation to add 2 ex officio members to the finance committee that would be represented by OPSI and CEA. I think it's important that they sit at the table when we have these conversations. I want to make sure everyone's on the same page as we go through these financial processes that we have in the school district.
Or at least have the opportunity.
And we'll have the opportunity, correct. And so I would like to get the recommendation of the committee so that can flow upwards to the board so we can make that change to the committee charter and get that moving for August. Would be the first time that we would have those members on there. So we'll save that until everyone else gets here. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stan and Scott to move on items 3 and 4, the proposal for latchkey increase and the monthly financial report. Thank you, Stan.
Sure. Now, I thought you wanted me to wait on latchkey.
No, it's fine. We can go ahead.
No, let's start. I think start there because we don't have to vote on that, do we? Well, we might not be able to vote on any.
I was confused. I thought this was a piece where we had funds transferring from one place to another.
Dom,
So
you
if
may
it's
want to
not,
switch places with him or skip
Yeah.
it.
No, that's okay. Stay right there. We had set this up. David Baker is going to do the presentation to the committee
okay.
on the request for latchkey fee increases.
Okay.
And so with that in mind, you know David Baker, so there he is.
I don't need to
Hello.
go through the introductions piece.
No.
It's just us today. However, Kathy Leffler, who's the Executive Director for Special Education, and Ann Lockett, who is our Director for Early Childhood, will also be participating a little bit this afternoon, mostly answering those questions about latchkey that I'm not able to answer, because that is definitely more their world than mine. But I do help with the budgeting piece and the finance piece. So a little bit of background on latchkey, just to make sure we're all on the same playing field here with some information. It does fall under special education and specifically early childhood education here on our organizational chart. We offer latchkey in 22 of our elementary schools across the district and are serving almost 900 kids on any one given day, either before or after school. Our current fee structure is families do pay $50 for before school care, $50 for after-school care, or a combined $65 if they need both morning and after care.
Is that for what time period? For the school year? For the month?
That is per week.
Okay.
And do you want the time of the day that they're in?
No. That's why I just
Okay.
maybe if this
Yes.
comes to the board, add that with that
I think
period.
I've got that later. but
Okay.
I have certainly added to this for clarity. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
We do accept publicly funded child care dollars, and our staff does a great job helping families with that paperwork so that we can get those funds for them so that they're not paying that necessarily out of pocket for those who qualify. This is also a driving factor for school choice. A lot of our families, when they're going through the lottery process, will ask where those latchkey programs are offered so that they can get their children into that school. However, for those who choose to stay in their home school that doesn't have latchkey, there are special situations where we provide transportation from the home school to a school with latchkey so that they can have that care as well. Huge bullet point here at the end, and this is kind of a reason why we're here today, is that it is a self-sustaining program. With the funds that are collected and the cash balance that builds up over time, we are able to self-sustain the program without implicating the general fund.
And when was the last time it was increased?
2006.
Okay.
And that's coming up this month.
Thank you, sorry.
That's
Do you see it now?
That's all right. The latchkey staff, just a little about them, very qualified. They are certificated teachers and highly experienced staff. They work on daily lesson plans around areas that are aligned with Ohio's learning standards, English, language arts, mathematics, science, social studies, as well as art and dramatic play. They do a great job assisting with homework help, both before and after school. And then the other piece is that parent communication. They do meet with parents and communicate with parents, both the successes that their students are having in the child care program and the challenges that they're seeing, so they can see that consistency between the school day and before after school. Here's the issue that we're facing right now, and that is that without a revenue increase, we will fail to be a self-sustaining program here in the coming years. We must increase that funding stream in order to keep that status as a self-sustaining program. And so we are bringing this request to you for consideration. We'd like to be able to take to the board for further consideration for next year. On the left is that current fee structure, and I will add that per week notion that Ms. Hudson had mentioned. I thought I had it here, and it's not. So we do, like I said, offer $50 per week for morning care, and we are requesting that we be able to raise that fee to $5 per week for morning care. $50 a week per afternoon care is what we currently collect from families. We'd like to raise that to $60 per week for afternoon care. And then for the combined, again, we currently collect $65 for morning and afternoon care, and we would like to raise that to by $10 to $75 for both morning and afternoon care. The rationale, like I said, it's been 12 years since we have done a fee request for Latchkey. If you think about that, our current seniors were kindergartners the last time the fee was requested. So we've had a full generation of students move through.
Really?
Yeah. Put it in terms of, I also had that in terms because that's retirement for me, is this one generation. This year's kindergartners will be seniors. I look at it in this generation. We've also seen an increase in salary and benefits with FY18 with the negotiated agreement that was approved this year. And as well, there will be an increase in work hours for FY19. Our new school calendar has an early release date each month of the year. Well, just because we are releasing school early doesn't mean that mom and dad are getting off work early or whoever's at home. And so we will need to extend those latchkey hours by 90 minutes once a month. And over those 22 schools and all those employees, that will add up. So we will see an increase there. This also puts us in closer alignment, I'll show you the details in a moment, but closer alignment with our neighborhood school districts and as well the Urban 8 and what they are charging for before and after school care. And then finally, it's going to keep us self-sustaining, and that's probably one of the biggest drivers for us. Here's a demonstration of some of the neighboring districts. I'll get to the Urban 8 in just a second, but you can see Central Ohio. Keep in mind the $75 fee that we're looking at for both before and after school care still keeps us close to that bottom of the pack with our neighboring districts. I believe the lowest on there is Gahanna, but again, that is only for afternoon care.
Hey, Jody.
And the lowest of the good afternoon. Lowest of the districts that are charging for both morning and afternoon is Worthington, and we would be directly in line with Worthington there. On the right side are some of the child care centers that we're most familiar with across Central Ohio and what they charge for both morning and afternoon care. Our $75 request would certainly be a lot less than what even those centers are requesting.
And David, those costs are the latchkey as opposed to like the all-day service.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. Here's the Urban 8, and we just got the last two in yesterday, so these are fairly new numbers for us. But you see the other Urban 8 districts are, only one would be less than what we are currently offering, aside from Youngstown. Youngstown's situation is a little different. Youngstown is grant funded, and they only offer it from October 1st through May 1st, so I don't know what students are doing during September and May, but it is free for parents because it is grant funded and only in the afternoon. They don't offer morning care for their families. Here's the impact of the request. You take a look at this chart. We're going to have a projected cash balance of about $343,000 for this school year. Projected revenue with and without the rate increases listed here. Without that rate increase, we plan to collect about $1.8 million in revenue. With the fee increase, it would be $2.1 million. Expenditures, of course, remain the same regardless of the fee increase, and the administrative costs remain the same regardless of the fee increase. But you can see what that bottom line is. Without the fee increase, our cash balance decreases, and so we really need that fee increase in order to start to build that back up again.
Now, this sits in a fund, right? So we don't have instances that you see sometimes in other government entities where they raid the rotary funds. Okay.
And in fact, Scott or Stan, you probably be able to best address how those funds are set up. Okay, so this is 1 year's time. Here's a graph of what this looks like over time. That blue line that goes horizontal through the middle is that zero line. We're trying to stay even, so that's $0. We break even right there. That red line is the current fee structure. And so you see there at FY18 where we are, and right about from FY20 to FY21 is where we hit that blue line, we break even, and then we start implicating the general fund after FY20. With that fee increase, you see a nice arc there. We start to build that cash balance again, and we don't hit that blue line until right around FY28 or 29. Now, certainly that doesn't mean if we were to add some teachers, if the program grows, if we were to add a school or two, that would push that to happen a little sooner. But nonetheless, it allows that cash balance to build up a little bit so that we can expand.
So you're saying there's some uncertainty in the future years?
Uncertainty in the future,
Yeah.
you never know.
Just checking.
I would suggest that the program docket for at least every 2 years to evaluate fees. Look at the other districts, look at expenses, look at projections, because, a lot can change. But to wait so long and then do it, we don't want to wait till we're getting close to the blue line, because we don't know where that's going to be, so.
In fact, when we were planning for today, we talked about that very scenario of doing a 2 to 3
I just think
year
if a
review.
couple folks put that on their calendar, so they know, no matter who's here, that you're gonna come and, you're gonna do that evaluation and see if it needs to go up some more. Even in $5 or something like that.
Absolutely. We do have a communication plan built in, ready to go. In fact, it has already started. We have given our parents a heads up that this is in discussion so that they can begin to plan. If a rate increase were to occur, they can start to get ready for that. If it is approved by the board, then certainly we will update the parent handbook and make sure that the district website reflects the new fees. All the documents, of course, will reflect the new fees as well. And we'll start getting all that information out to buildings.
So what happens if a parent, and I know this will probably come at the board meeting, have any parents indicated that that increase would be a hardship, or how do we handle that issue?
Ann, can you kind of answer questions on any communication you've had, please?
Some of the families in Latchkey are PFCC funded, so publicly funded childcare. So if there is a hardship, they would certainly talk and look at their eligibility for publicly funded childcare.
Mhm.
If they have a hardship, they have conversations with the office staff of the Latchkey program,
Mhm.
and they sometimes help them with a payment plan.
Okay,
A lot of flexibility.
good.
What other questions?
So just letters going out? Are we sending emails, calls, anything like that? Because I know we may have some board members that ask about
App.
various
Put
communications.
it on the app.
Mhm.
Sure, well, all these families that are currently enrolled in the program
Mhm.
can receive a letter
Mhm.
as they pick up their children every day
Mhm.
from the providers at the schools. So they will have immediate information as soon as the information is approved and gets put out.
With Latchkey, they have to come in and sign their children in and out, and so there's opportunity right there to hand them information as they come in. So we don't
And then
have to
for the
worry about
new
mail.
people, they'll have the website and then we'll have it in the handbook as
Yeah, it won't get buried in a backpack or something, so it's good. Yeah, I think it's just about, going forward, reviewing this, at least every 2 years. And, so that if you need to be incremental, then we just stay above that blue line. In kind of a consistent place, and perhaps identifying what would that cushion be. Because I know if is a raise, there's a drop, if we would have a change in state or federal requirements, if we have to suddenly have more staff, we want to have a cushion there. Not like we're making money on it, but just to rainy day sort of
well.
thing.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Thank you for that.
And currently, just process so you understand, internally, we've actually been talking about this, looking at this for over a year.
Great.
And what we do in our budget monitoring process is every quarter we go over what their revenues were versus what their expenditures were. We look at that so that we can kind of trend things out a little bit and catch it, because we don't, like you said, we don't want to wait till it's too late.
Right. That's, that, you may want to add that note on the slide, or
okay.
something like that. That'd be great. I don't have any other comments or questions.
Anything else? All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate
Great,
that. Thank you.
So do they need a comment that you agree and that you would recommend that going? I mean, we plan on taking it, you're gonna wait with it. I don't know, I'm just,
No.
It would start next school letter.
And this will be on the board agenda.
Yeah.
And it's no general funds.
No.
Okay. So
It's all fee-based.
Yeah, fee-based.
Yes, no, that's good.
But and I think before you came in, they haven't raised the fee in 12 years.
Yeah, so it's time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Still no quorum, but we're going to move ahead now to the monthly financial report.
Can the subcommittee at least make a recommendation that it's okay?
Do you think we need to? I mean, I'm not.
I don't
This
think,
is
maybe
the
you could
first
just,
time.
I think maybe say, no, we didn't have any objections.
Okay. Well then, let me be parliamentary then. Do we have a recommendation from the subcommittee to recommend this report to the board?
I would so move.
We have a second?
I second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. All right, the subcommittee moves it forward. Thank you.
Recommends it, yes.
We'll
Make note of that.
figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Jody, Mary Jo. Okay,
All right.
all set?
Mhm.
Okay, moving forward with the next item, monthly financial report for April. Just to begin, I'll say I'm trying out a few new graphics on
like
all
that.
of you.
Yeah.
This time around, see if.
Did you learn that at the conference?
Actually, I have to give credit where credit is due. I saw this on our Tyler Transparency website and how
Okay.
they displayed some things. I did not call them and ask them how to do it. I decided that that would be just perhaps way too tacky. So I spent a fair amount of time fumbling through Excel charting and figured it out.
All right.
And then presented it to my cohorts on the third floor as this genius thing that I found in my studies, and took full credit for the creation of this. But
Wow.
it
You still
was-
got it, Stan.
Yeah,
That's good.
and so I ran it by the number geeks and Eric, because he doesn't want to be branded a numbers geek, and so everybody contributed
Sorry, Eric, you are a numbers
to the colorization and layout somewhat. So with that, in April, as we have seen in almost every month, revenues are running above plan, and expenditures year-to-date are under plan. This month, however, total revenues came in about 10.6 million under plan, and that dropped the year-to-date variance to 19.2 million favorable, that is above plan. Overall, that's about 2%, plus 2% on year-to-date revenues of 843 million. Total expenditures ran about 1.6 million under plan, bringing the year-to-date expenditures to almost 19 million under plan, which is about 3% on total year-to-date expenditures of 700 million. And as you can imagine, with those two favorable variances, our ending cash balance is up over plan by about 38 million. Getting down into some of the revenue detail, again, a little bit of a new graphic. Because we have two very significant sources of revenue, you'll see later that it dwarfs the other revenues in terms of a graphical representation. So what I've done here is combine for you, show property taxes and state aid on two categories, and then lump everything else together. Again, you can see that property taxes and state revenue dwarf the other revenue sources dramatically. But property taxes, there were no activity this month. As you know, we got settlement in March, and so we should be done pretty much, except for maybe some minor things through the balance of the year. So that favorable variance will hold to the end of the year. State revenue, slightly under plan for the month, just $353,000 under plan. That year-to-date variance now stands at 1.1 million over plan, or just 0.4% over what was in the original plan. The most recent calculation, which is the second payment in April, from the state indicates that we should receive about 339.9 million. We have a plan for about 341.5 million, and that would end up being about $1.6 million less than planned if that comes true, but still, with less than 1% variance there. So that's essentially right on target. When we go further, and I broke out other revenues here to demonstrate their contribution, and I would remind you that on this graph, this is in tens of millions, rather the previous graph was hundreds of millions.
Okay,
That's how
that's better, breaking
it breaks it out this way.
Yeah.
As you can see, property tax allocation appears to be way under plan. That happens to be a timing issue. The rollback has to be processed by the state of Ohio after settlement. We received settlement in March. We would have expected it in April. It didn't, so it is coming. We actually have the number. We anticipate 17 million by the end of the year. More. The number that's on the settlement sheet is $16,766,864. So that page is not in your, I didn't
Oh,
print that
okay.
out. Because this is a late creation
Got
in
it.
my spare time.
Okay.
Not really.
Good.
But it's a late creation. So that'll be right on target by the end of the year. You see other revenues, which is tuition fees, investment income, Medicaid reimbursement. It's running ahead of plan, but again, about 6.4 million of the June amount is Medicaid reimbursement. So I don't anticipate that coming in June because we've already received it. And so we should be back to being more on plan. So you're going to see those two. The orange bar and other revenues will go up, and the blue bar property tax allocation will go up, and they'll be pretty much right on plan by the end of the year. The other financing sources, there was minimal activity this month. That's advances in and transfers in and advances in. Very minimal activity this month, but it did decrease the variance slightly to about 792 over plan. But again, that's the way we would prefer to have that line end up. So the chart that was printed out for you, and this is the typical one we show, these are all the categories broken out. And again, you can simply see where the preponderance of our revenue is in property taxes and state aid, and that brings that all together. On expenditures, again, three major groupings: personnel, like it or not, charter schools, community schools, the payments, and then all other expenditures. And you can see how personnel really dwarfs the other two, and charter actually dwarfs all of our other expenditures in this particular category. Personnel ran about 598,000 under plan. Net favorable variance has increased to 8.6 million under plan. If we estimate that, that current variance is about 1.83%. If we look at that variance on a end of year basis, for a full year basis, that'd be about 10.6 million under plan. So that's where we're getting that favorable contribution that I talked to you about when we did the 5-year forecast. So revenue running above plan. This is a fairly large item running under plan for expenditures, which helps build that cash balance. Again, that's the way we like it. There's an annual appropriation for person.
Real quick, Stan, just
Yes.
because we get a lot of questions about that. You know, that piece right there, when we talked about some of our budget reductions and how we're looking into the future, you were taking this into account as we look at the long-term scheme of where we're going to be at financially. Like, you're forecasting being a little bit more conservative, and this is a good illustration of that.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And when we began our reduction plan, and we were looking at the $224 million deficit, we immediately
10 to 15
took items out of that. For instance, the movement of the Cadillac tax because of the tax bill. We immediately assumed for that exercise that there would be these types of favorable variances, so we reduced the amount of deficit that we would have to address. And then we began to look at, well, how much of that remaining deficit should we do in expenditure reductions as we look out over a 5 to 8 year period. Interestingly enough, as it turned out, now that we look to the end of the year and those favorable variances, look at the impact that has on the revenue side for the balance of the forecast. Then factor in the reductions of approximately 18.3 million that carries forward. And I'm going to use the word was perfect, because over the life of that forecast, we're now projecting that, I think it's 4.7 million, but to me that's zero. So like David's previous graph, we've taken that line that trended down into the negative, and based upon our best assumptions and outlook into the future, we've brought that up more even with zero. Again, we don't have a cushion that Board Member Hudson referenced, that we're not forecasting that in or trying to build that in, but at least now our best projections, yes, do bring us in. So yes, this cushion is something that we would assume would naturally happen because of that conservative forecasting. Okay? The appropriation for personnel stands at about 587 million, and that should be sufficient to cover our projected annual spend here of 580 million. So we don't at this time anticipate the need to bring an increase in the appropriation resolution to the board for the end of the year. But again, we'll watch that right up to the end of the day. We have a board meeting I think it's June, I want to say June 30th, if we need to make an adjustment.
Correct.
That's
June
that.
29th.
June 29th?
June
So it's
29th.
the June 29th. I think it's going to be like 10 a.m. in the morning to do a final adjustment to the appropriations to even that out if we need to. But I don't think that will be the case here for personnel, which is the largest item. Okay? As we look at purchase services, but I'll talk about the charter school portion of that first. It came in 1.1 million under plan this month, increasing that favorable variance to about 3.5 million on the 157 million that was planned so far through the year. Our latest report from the state shows a total of about 185 million for this deduction that we can expect, and that given that we've budgeted about 191 million, we'd be about 6 million under plan. However, at this point, and this is something the board will see on next Tuesday's meeting, we're going to reallocate that 6 million favorable variance from the charter school deduction to out-of-school tuition, because that's running a little bit higher than we had anticipated. So again, not an increase in our overall appropriation, but just a realignment of it. So we'll use
And is that going to be a behavior that we're going to have to continue for the next few years then?
Well, out-of-school tuition, just like charter schools, it's hard to predict because the students that leave us and come back to us, that varies every year, and I don't, other than history, have a good way to model that or predict that. So I can't say that this year's behavior has been a monumental change in that overall behavior. But we will factor that into the modeling. But since we look over a 5-year or longer period, we try and trend those or smooth those kind of larger variances out, okay?
And we're trying to determine the data from ODE, if these are current year adjustments or if these are adjustments for prior years.
Sure.
So then, once we understand what that is, we'll know how to project that going forward.
There's a lot going on in the bi-monthly settlement sheets for the school foundation payment that we don't discuss here. We're at a very high level because we look at the gross amount that comes in, some of the bigger deductions. But as Scott pointed out, there's a lot of adjustments going on, and some of them are current year and some are prior year. But overall, like the 1.6 million that we're under can be because of adjustments.
Sure.
It's not because we don't know what that formula says, okay?
So we always know we're gonna have to, come back and look at that and see if it's, it's like trying to predict it before you have all the information. So.
When we look at purchase services outside of the charter and STEM and scholarship lines, purchase services this month ran about $500,000 over plan. That year-to-date variance stands now at $2.5 million under plan versus $3 million last month. And our projection still stands, so we're going to have a spend of about $62 million or $2.4 million under plan for purchase services.
So any idea why the 11% increase? Is it timing? Was it more enrollment that we thought than on the charter side?
You mean on the out-of-school tuition side? I don't have an answer for that. It is all student related, so it has to do with. I don't believe that we forecast that based on student and amount per student. It's more just trending it. So the combination of those two variables gets. I hate to say washed in there, but it ends up being a combination. So if we don't forecast it based upon numbers of students and dollars per students, then to go back and dissect that, we would have to look at the trend in those two to see, well, this one went this way and that one went this way, and that really was what was the cause. But overall, I can't say one or the other at this point.
Okay.
And we don't know if it'll go up or go down over years, so.
I don't know what's going to happen with
keep
tuition
predicting the
students.
same number, I guess,
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. Just
And that's typically why, unfortunately, this year we didn't appropriate enough, but typically we will appropriate more than is needed, and that's part of that conservative forecasting. Now,
Yeah, no.
supplies and materials,
Thank
Scott and I did a lot more work this month on this, and we have delved into the data even deeper. And in fact, you did ask me at the beginning of the meeting if some of the graphical displays is something that I learned at the Tyler conference that I went to. This, in fact, some of our data mining is something that we picked up at this conference, and the ability, we use a data connection to our database, which is called Cube, and it connects Excel to the database directly so that we don't have to run reports and then import them into Excel. This does it automatically. But
Good.
not all the fields in the database come over in a cube, and not all of a data field that we would like to see is necessarily held in our database. It functions very well as our accounting system, but when we get to analytics, some of that data isn't available. So we've learned how we can derive what we need by the creation of additional, what they call measures, or in database terminology would be a field. So we can take what we've got, do some adds and subtracts, and come up with the field as the way we want it, and then present it in Excel, and that's some of the things that you're going to see here. So supplies and materials, again, 7 out of the last 9 months have been running under plan. April's no exception. Ran about $382,000 under plan. That favorable variance now stands at $2.6 million under plan, very similar to the purchase services favorable variance. The 5 largest contributors to that remain the same as they have in the past several months. General supplies, software, supplemental textbooks, operation and maintenance, supplies, materials, and then other supplies and materials. And I would say if you look at page
The object detail.
page 7 of your MD&A report, you will see a couple of things here that I'll point out. First of all, we've been able now to easily segregate out what we call current year accounts versus carry forward accounts. The way this system works doesn't make that immediately available to us. So we've now figured out a way through this new technique that we learned to segregate those out so we can separate all the activity from what we call carry forwards. That's a purchase order that was issued last fiscal year that carries forward to this fiscal year and may be paid in part or in full and closed out. We can watch that activity separate. Then we have what I call current year accounts. That's the current appropriation that the board adopts, and we can see what's going on in those accounts on a current year basis because budget managers don't have access to their prior year data. They can't move that budget, they can't work with that budget. If they carry forward a $1,000 purchase order, they can pay it off for $1,000 and it closes. If they pay it off for $500, rather than have that roll into their current budget, Scott goes in and takes that away so that they don't have access to that because they should only have access to their current year accounts. So on page 7 at the very top, we were looking at budgetary data at the object level, purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, etc. And what the takeaway is, if you look at the third column called current year transfers, you'll see that there are net transfer out from purchase services, supplies, and other, and a net transfer in to capital outlay. Now I will tell you that the line 09, the other funds, that net transfer in 594, are those movements where prior year accounts have been closed out, prior year purchase orders have been closed out. All right? So some of what's going on in the above accounts is being impacted by those prior year accounts. That's one item I can't segregate out by this object report. The gist of this is we see a net movement out of other non-personnel lines over to capital outlay. So that tells us 2 things. One, that's why some of them run under, although this isn't nearly large enough to explain the 2.6 or 2.5 million under, but it does account for at least a portion of it. And then it also indicates to us that we might expect that there's going to be an expenditure or an encumbrance in capital outlay larger than what we originally anticipated. So if you look at just that, you can see that while we originally budgeted just under 1.9 million, there remains about 1.6 million on a current year basis yet to be expended or encumbered. And from a behavioral standpoint, we anticipate end of year ordering to occur that will probably encumber those dollars, okay? We delved then further into supplies and materials to give you a look by even greater object detail. Again, isolating current year activity, you can see that those transfers all add up to $790,000, which is the amount in the chart above it. But overall, when you look on a current year basis, they only have remaining about 18% of their budget, which means they're 82% spent or encumbered. So the supplies seem to be behaving the way we would expect them to at this point in time, even though they've taken some of their available budget and transferred it out into other lines, and on a net basis, it seems it moving in the direction of equipment. Not atypical behavior. If you're waiting for like big ticket items like equipment is, you see how your year's going, and as you move along, they go, okay, well, we're not going to consume it supplies, so let's reallocate it and maybe buy a piece of equipment we haven't been able to plan for before. So I think this gives a much deeper look, and I think, Scott, you're going to have a conversation with budget directors using some of this data.
Because internally, I take this and then I go down further to each one of our specific OPUs, and we'll reach out to them and talk through and say, hey, for example, we had one that was supplemental textbooks, and what was originally budgeted for the hardbound moved to an online piece. So it moved from a supply to a purchase service. Absolutely makes sense, but until you get down into that, that's what that was. It was almost a one-for-one.
So just rest assured, we're mining the data and following up, and sometimes what looks at the aggregate is, my goodness, what's going on? I go so far, then I pass the spreadsheet over to Scott, and he adds a field and goes even deeper, so it works out real well. But this was I think it was a great, great find that makes it, heretofore it was just more difficult, and so that's one of the benefits of my time that I picked that up, so it was it's a very
that's
valuable
great.
piece of information.
Takeaway.
Capital outlay, we talked about that already. It's already running over plan, primarily because of what carried forward from last year, but we expect that to stay over plan, especially with the net movement of budget into there. So if it's not expended, it'll certainly be encumbered. This will probably hit $3.2 million by the end of the year versus a $2 million in the plan. And I've got that budgetary data here for you, separating out current year and carry forward items. You can see 2.2 million came over from last year, and all but 2,600 has been paid for or liquidated. On a current year basis, we started at 1.864 million, add the 840, and they spent a little over $1 million, so they still have that $1.6 million left to encumber for the balance of the year. Okay? So I think that really helps break it out and give you a much clearer picture. Debt service, there was no activity this month. Other object, minimal activity. And the last line, other financing uses, this is the transfers out and advances out are included here. No activity for the month, but if you look at the chart or the graph on page 9, you'll see that there's a spike in May and June, and that just represents year-end activity. We won't know what that's really going to look like until we see how all the other funds are ending their year and anticipate their cash flow needs. So that brings me to the end, our last graph of what you're typically seeing, where you can see the personnel dwarfs everything else, obviously, and all of it is spelled out. The revenues are above plan, expenditures under plan. We expect that to continue for the balance of the year. I think it's all good news. I think we're doing our due diligence to drill down in and make sure that we're more than that we're on track with our spending, but that we're actually spending it where it's needed and where we plan to do it, and have an explanation of any changes that occur. So we do watch that closely internally. So that's it for the month of April.
Okay.
Any questions?
No, I think it's great that you're able to drill in
Yeah.
further, so.
In an area that we've been needing to drill in more.
Well, we were,
Appreciate that.
you know us, we were really excited when we were able to Well, at least a couple of us were.
Couple of people.
We got a couple oohs and ahs to
We-
the graphs.
Yeah,
so
that's-
I think it's great.
I really like that.
What do you call those, layered bars, or what do
I
you call those?
really neat, cool-looking graphs. I don't know what else you
Very
call
nice.
them. I had a little 3D effect going. I will say this too. Mike and I just saw an online demo. Tyler has purchased another data visualization company called Socrata, and we saw a demo of that. And it was a competing product with their transparency product. But we looked at Socrata, and being a third-party piece of software, it has some bells and whistles to it in terms of the display of data, dashboarding, things like that, some customizations that we might be able to do. So during the demo, we talked to them about some ways that we would like to be able to present our data publicly, up to and including things like, can we get something that looks like the 5-year forecast layout that would accumulate that information and present it out to the public that way with a single click. Most of the transparency and checkbook sites are very data dump oriented. Here's all our data, we'll summarize it at a very all funds, all revenues, all expenditures level. And then it allows the user kind of an infinite ability to drill down into it. But unfortunately, the user doesn't always know where they need to look. And so we have to, I think, build some presentations, some preset presentations for the users to make it easier for them to work. Let's go back a little bit when the transparency site that we have went live. Not a couple of months into it, the Bill Bush at the Dispatch called Mike and said, I'm on your transparency site, I'm trying to do this. And Mike said, look, rather than do this over the phone, come into the office. So Bill came in, Mike and I sat in my office, went through it. Bill said, I'd really like to see this. I forget what it was, but he asked for something, and Mike said, all right, we're not pulling that dimension of our account code over, but we can. So we modified it, we got it, and now if the Dispatch wants to see whatever it was Bill was looking for, he can do the drill down. But it's that kind of conversation and
That's
feedback
helpful,
that
yeah.
we can be very accommodative of making the data available. Not that we don't want to hear from everybody or anybody during office hours kind of a thing, but if we can make it already available in a format that's understandable
Yeah.
to them,
Right.
I think that's a great thing. So we have yet to commit to them. We've asked for a side-by-side comparison of the two sites. They were just purchased about 2 or 3 weeks ago, so it's not clear. I wouldn't think that they would purchase Socrata and not pursue that platform over their own. So they're also very excited to have someone in Ohio spearhead or pilot this. They are a competitor with OpenGov, which is the framework for the state treasurer's website. I will just tell you that our success with that site has been less than satisfactory.
Okay.
Mike has tried several times. Last year, we do a 1-year data upload. And last year, he did that and waited and waited. And the only data that's up there is still fiscal 16.
Huh.
And here we are at the end of fiscal
Wow.
18.
Wow.
So in terms of
I'm glad
our,
that we stuck with Tyler.
Good intentions.
yeah, to be honest, I'm glad we have Tyler because our public persona, our face forward to the public is up to date every Friday night. And, it's seamless. And now we're looking at even enhancing that with the new platform. So Socrata is interested in finding someone in Ohio to kind of lead the way. I will let you draw your own conclusions because they are a competitor with OpenGov, why they would want someone in Ohio to be a proponent and a user of that. So that competitive edge is, it kind of gets me going too. I want to be the best and the first.
Yeah.
So,
So
and
our
quite
last
frankly,
data is available on the treasurer's websites from 16, huh?
yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder if that's
They've
from
got
other school districts
I
as
have.
well?
They've updated other school districts.
Okay. All right. So there's where we are.
Interesting.
All right. That's the monthly financial report.
Interesting.
Okay. So
All right, so now we're on to item 5.
Right, which is a lot of me and a cast of folks here, who all's here, Maurice and Annette. That's it, Maurice and Annette, they can join us maybe at the table as we go through this. What I'd like to do,
Come on up.
and the reason why I said this is gonna be a lot of me is because this is the first time we presented the concept of a capital funds budget. And I'd like to walk you through where we are, what we're looking at, and just set the tone for how far we can go in our discussion today, given the 3 minutes that we have. But what are we looking at today? This is our first draft of this. I want you to look at the layout and the format and the flow of this budget. I will tell you right now, I mean, I put this flow together. I used all of their data and plugged it in here, trying to put it in a flow that accountants or budgeting people might understand and appreciate. I'm not satisfied with this layout and how it flows yet. I'm looking for suggestions and critique. Also, we'll look at the content, and then lastly is what level of detail, because I've got various levels of detail in here that you think would be appropriate for the budget to be discussed at this level. You're not going to look at all 10,000 account codes that we've got in the general fund. I get that. You're not going to do this. So what level of detail do we need to be at? So that's kind of my goal for today. So when we started to look at the capital budget, we had to identify sources and uses. We have 5 sources of funds for capital expenditures. The Permanent Improvement Fund, I marked that as 16 because that's the new $500,000 permanent improvement levy that was approved in November of 16. We have Operation Fix It. That actually is a bond issue, $125 million bond issue approved in November of 16. We have what we call the sale of buildings old, number old. That's buildings as probably sold prior to, when did we start to? A couple of years ago?
Just last year.
Last year. So anything prior to last year, it was held separately. We then have sale of buildings 2. We set up a separate fund, special cost center for that, because the discussion there was around the use of specific dollars from the sale of specific buildings for specific deferred maintenance kind of uses. So we wanted to make sure that we segregated that out. And last but certainly not least is the other $500,000 permanent improvement levy we have, but those are restricted funds too for OSFC and for the OSFC buildings that have been built or renovated. So that's restricted. On the uses side, I got input from buildings and grounds, and buildings and grounds covers the gamut of deferred maintenance, life cycle replacement, just all sorts of things that buildings and grounds has to do to maintain and upkeep our buildings. And then we started to identify big ticket items that we might want to pull out. For instance, buses, big ticket item. And tonight we don't have time to talk about it, but trying to get on a routine cycle when you bought a big chunk of them all at one time and a significant portion of your fleet is all the same age, but you need to be doing it bit and bit over time. Walking yourself into that's a challenge. We won't do that tonight, but that's why we pulled that out. Capital renewal, that was an Alex Trevino comment. He might be able to explain, or Maurice can fill in, but there's an idea of capital renewal. IT is a big ticket item. Vehicle replacement is another one we wanted to identify. And the last item, which I'll call the Dominic Peretti / board item.
You have too many Dominic Peretti titled
That is the GRF, General Revenue Fund reallocation, where every time we talk about the general fund, somebody says, let's get the capital out and put it over in capital funds. So we need a line item to identify all those things that came out, whether it was textbooks or a printer or a copier that might have been in the general fund.
Chromebooks.
And
Kids.
here we go.
Kids and technology.
So
things
all
they
of
need.
that, so it doesn't get lost, we need to accumulate that and call it that GRF reallocation. We didn't, that was just the name we came up as a group. So that's where we will look at it.
And the capital renewal, if I may, the capital renewal, excuse me, if you recall, you used to hear us talk a lot about life cycle replacement. So tying into one, the capital renewal, those things that have a life cycle, but that we need to renew those. So for example, there may be items that need to be done now as part of deferred maintenance. There may be items such as if we start planning, we know it has a life cycle or capital renewal in 20 years. Then we need to start planning for those type of things.
Okay.
So this is what we started with, that identification. So we take our sources and our uses and we combine those in these in together, and we do that over time. Notice sources and uses are over time. Over
Very
time.
good.
We put that together over time, and that'll generate for us a multi-year capital budget, which we did. So the budget is laid out this way. The first few pages are our cash position that brings revenue and expense together over, I think we've done a 5-year period. Then we have revenue broken out. That's fairly straightforward. It's only one page. And then we get into the expenditure side, which is really what you might call the budget. We show some summary data, and then we get into some greater detail, and that varies depending on who we're looking at. So what you have before you is a packet, 30 pages long. Starts off with a page that looks like this, and all that I'm doing on the PowerPoint right now is making sure that we're all, as we say, on the same page. So talking to you about page 1, I just wanted to show you that we have our funds broken down. And some of this is accounting. We have it broken down by fund group, a permanent improvement fund, a building construction fund, the OSFC maintenance fund. And then within that, where needed, we have the SCC stands for Special Cost Center. And that breaks it down in, and for simplicity purposes, call it a checkbook. It separates it out into a separate checkbook where we track revenue and expenditures related to that funding source, separate from all other funding sources. So you can see that in the Permanent Improvement Fund, we have under SEC 0300 is the Permanent Improvement Levy. That's the new one. Then we have the Operation Fix-It Fund in 0303, the 2007 improvement bonds, sale of buildings 2. Then sale, and you can see it there. That's how that's spelled out. We show a beginning balance, we show revenue, and we bring expenditures in, and then ending balance over time.
Sale buildings 1 is old.
Is the old one. Sale buildings is 2 is the current one that we're funding. Now, if we go to page 2, the reason why I'm pointing this out to you is because on page 1 you have some history. 2014, 15, 15, 16, 16, 17, you have history. But when we get into 17, 18, and beyond, I had to add a line because one of the things I wanted to do in this budget presentation was track not only what we plan for that gets funded based upon our revenue stream, but what remains unfunded.
Yeah.
What would buildings and grounds and operation and maintenance and transportation and IT, what would they like to do in a given fiscal year, but they just don't have the funding? So we're going to mark that as unfunded. Now, I will tell you this is not perfectly spread out yet, but the concept is out there, and we spent I've spent a fair amount of time with Maurice and his team and Scott and Mike and working through this just to get the concepts down on paper. But I wanted to show you that what we do, what you see interestingly enough here is if you just go across where it says 0300 Permanent Improvement Levy, you'll see a beginning balance. And there are 2 beginning balances, one that carried forward from the previous period based upon those things that we could fund, and then the other represents unfunded. So clearly from 17-18, we had about $2.6 million of unfunded expenditures, and they runs that theoretical balance negative, but we spent everything in 17-18 that was available. And then you see revenue of $4.4 million, which is the PI levy, the $500,000. And then you'll see there under expenditures for 2018, 3 lines. Essential, that was my term, meaning that's the total amount that Maurice's team put together and said, we have needs in this year of this amount. Now, this particular one says $97 million. That needs to clearly be spread out. But at least it's a placeholder, and you can see the dramatic impact that has over time. Whether we spread $97 million out over 2 years or 5 years, at the end of the day, it's $97 million, okay? So you see essential is $97 million, and all we could fund that year is 4.4 because that's what we had, 0 beginning balance plus 4.4 million in revenue. We could fund 4.4, and then you leave 92.9 million unfunded, and it drives the balances down. And that carries forward year to year to year to year. And that's what's on pages 1 through 3. That's the layout. When we get to revenue summary on page 5.
And all this under unfunded would roughly get to around the 425.
Well, that money,
million.
that number has grown over time.
Of course it has.
No, it's grown in conversation over time. I think in actuality it hasn't. I think we're more in the tune of 125 and another 100. About, would you say, you think about 250 to 3? Well, you'll see it. You'll see it.
That's the actual number that we're working with. I think what you have to keep in mind, though, these are the items working off that was on the deferred maintenance. And when you look at the deferred maintenance we originally had was about $272 million. And then when you look at the Operation Fix-It dollars that came into it, but understand there's still other things out there that
That's right.
still keeps coming into
Mm-hmm.
that's fluid.
So we're dealing with things that are identified, but we know that it's, what is that old thing? There are things that we know that we don't know. Things, okay, that one, that's how we are. So when you look at revenue's fairly straightforward. One page, permanent improvement levy. You can see here that the money comes from real estate taxes and rollback and homestead, and it lays out and it equates to about 4.4 million a year. On the Operation Fix-It side, that's bond money. We issued 75 million in 2016-17 fiscal year. I looked at the cash flow. I anticipate that not until the 1920 school year will I have to issue the remaining 50, but that'll be driven by need. Okay, and that's revenue. And then we are allocating some interest income there because when those idle dollars are there, we do invest those dollars.
Okay.
Then the sale of building funds, this is number 2. I've identified for you here by building, which ones we build, what the proceeds were in 17 and 18. I think Manacor has not sold, that's estimated based upon the assessed valuation. And then I assume that the other 1, 2, 3, 4 buildings all get sold sometime during next school year, and that those values are the most recent or the best values we've got for appraised value. So that represents income. After that, we don't know if there are any other buildings that need to be sold.
Right.
But that's how we would track that. Sale of buildings, number 1, you'll see that there were sales of buildings in fiscal year 15, 16, and 17, and after that, it's going into sale of buildings number 2, so that revenue stream stops. It creates available funds up to that point, and we won't be using that fund except for expenditures anymore.
So are we still gonna have this fund item? I mean, is it always gonna exist?
Well, it'll be here until you spend about 8 million of it,
Okay.
and Maurice has plans on that.
Good.
And then lastly, the $500,000 maintenance fund that was OSFC related. Notice, interestingly enough, that only generates about 3.9 million, a little bit less because it was
Based on that
approved
year.
prior, based upon that year. So this one doesn't generate quite what the new one does. And so that's how we laid out revenue. It's a fairly easy thing to lay out over time. The revenue side, I did it. It's very straightforward. Much more straightforward than general fund.
I think this is, I mean, I know we'll be working on the sort of layout of this at some point, maybe just some brief narratives would be helpful, sort of
Yeah,
like.
this is awesome.
It is
It
awesome.
is, yeah.
This is
it's
really
very
cool.
helpful.
This is really great.
In the
Hey,
future.
can I add an agenda item?
Yeah.
Oh, good. My contract and salary. Just while we're on a,
Yeah,
no?
this is great.
Okay, good.
We're only a
what's your
subcommittee
contract up again?
today.
Yeah.
We're only a subcommittee today.
Yeah. All right, now,
And we'll be high up on the awesome list.
let's see. I don't know why I do.
That's for everybody else. I know that.
Oh, I know. I just wanted to show the ad news. Okay, now if we go over to the expenditure summary, which is on page 7, that's where that begins. I only have one page up here, but page 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are the breakdown of the expenditures that we carried forward to the cash position. And they're broken down into various categories. So this first one is the 2016 brand new permanent improvement levy, based upon numbers from, this was actually a combination of Dewan and Maurice's team. By the way, I will say that Dewan took this very seriously.
Yes, he did.
He's a very serious individual, despite, even when I jab and poke him a little bit, he's very serious. He thinks that, but when I said I need detail, the pages from page 14 to 30 are all his. And his breakdown in his spreadsheet,
Oh, wow.
I used his
Oh.
layout to add the data I got from Annette and Maurice and Alex. I added into his layout to do the pivot table to generate these reports.
Oh,
So
my
he just
golly,
knocked.
This is what we've been talking about.
He knocked it out of the
Great.
park. So, back to pages, whatever I said, 7 through 11. This is a summary. It does give you some general categories: buildings and grounds, buses, IT, things like that. When you go over to the next page, this is the Operation Fix It. Now, why I put it in as annual planned expenditures is because we have a whole nother set of documents and reports that will break it out. Remember the chart that had the little dots on it by HVAC? That's all separate. I haven't figured out how we might want to incorporate it here, but the aggregate totals are here. And you'll see in this particular case, we spend all but, well, we actually spend more, have planned expenditures more than what's really available. And I will point out this when I have to pull through this slide up, and I'll do it on page 8 if you're all looking at page 8. At the bottom of this is how I calculate what's available, what gets funded, and what is unfunded. The available sources come from the cash position, beginning balance plus revenues, the available sources. And then I look at the very top line, which is all the subtotal. It makes more sense when there are more items on here. But I compare the available resources in this particular case, 74.7 million, to the amount that they want to fund, which is 26.7. And so all of that gets funded and none's unfunded, and that gets carried forward to the cash position report. If you would back up a page, you could see it more clearly, the impact of how that unfunded number occurs over time. But you can see that Dewan got a little aggressive on his expenditures of 94 million in 18-19. And we may need to spread that out, but it does create an unfunded amount that way. So I just wanted to show you that's what that calculation is.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, what, did we add something?
I think he just made a list and said, boy, I'd like to do this all next
Well,
year.
That and those items, when you look at it, is items that are what we call switch, go to proper upgrade electrical distribution services.
Yeah.
This is what brings the electric into our buildings. And so we just want to make sure we keep a close eye on those.
Sure.
But one of the beauty of it is, that's why we have to work close hand in hand with all of our team members, because as some of the operation fixes come up, it may address some of us with some of the strategy we choose with our HVAC system. But again, it's what brings the energy of the electric into our facility and disperse it out.
Right.
And then that's including all our buildings.
Okay.
So, summary, all the way across, I will say on sale of buildings 1, it's 8.6 million. There weren't necessarily specific things lined out, but it's for those, what I might call over and under unidentified and unanticipated expenditures that might occur. But this was, I realize it's $8.6 million, but compared to all the other monies we have, we'll identify some of that 92 million or something that will come to address these funds. So this isn't this.
Well, that, and also it's for unplanned. For example, for example, we're in the task force now, or there may be changes where we realize there's a building that we need to do some work. One of the things that's coming up now, we're looking at through some strategies of a couple of open concept buildings. What do we do to harden these buildings? So we have to have some revenue somewhere we can go back to be able to address those needs.
Sure.
And so we need to be able, that's why it's critical. We know those funds there, but to make sure we have some flexibility to be able to address those things. Otherwise, you're tied up and we don't fix for these things.
And then,
Because now I would have asked the budget items to come out of this if I would have known. Just kidding.
and then last but certainly not least, in pages 13 through 30, page 13 is just one example of some detail. It's not a great amount of detail more than what was on the summary pages, but I don't know where you want to go with detail, because then you get into what came from buildings and grounds, 14 through 30 in pages.
Is somebody on the line? Oh, that's you?
That's me, I'm
Okay.
sorry. My timer went off after a meeting lasted an hour, and therefore, so,
He kind of self-polices.
yeah. So that's the layout, the format, the flow. That's what I wanted to get across to you. It's a lot to digest. And now, as Maurice has chimed in, Maurice and Annette can answer any other questions, but, yeah, go.
Estimate cost. So in the 14, in this various project.
Yep.
So we've got estimate cost on the left and then funding source on the right. But then it just lists, so the numbers, the figures on the right, there's just one, is that what the cost is?
Yeah, those are
Or is
the,
that-
I'm sorry, those are the
Okay.
costs over there. And funding source up at the top is 0300, right under it.
Oh.
That's the account it's
What I would
coming from.
suggest,
Yeah,
I would
and we-
suggest, just as
Yeah.
format, maybe to clarify, but maybe add a bar underneath the orange
Yeah.
bar, to have a label. But the bigger question I wanted to ask is, I think, in addition to presenting this way, I think it would be good to have one that's building. Can it be sorted so it's by building and then?
I hate to tell you this, but it's almost any way you want it.
Oh, okay. You don't have to hate to tell. No. I think that's, and I'm thinking more in terms not for, I mean, I think for our analysis, this is probably better because it's in, you know, where we focus, but then also focus, you know, looking at that in a separate way because there are questions or folks say X school gets more attention than Y school. And it'd be a way to do an apples to apples comparison.
Well, where you see building name, fiscal year shop name, the shop name, that was Dewan's terminology for him. I didn't change it. Building name, if you can imagine, this is a spreadsheet. And the reason why I had funding source over here above that right-hand column is because as I could have run this and you'd see not only the 0300, which is the PI levy, you could see Operation Fix It, you could see the half-mil maintenance fund, you could see sale of buildings 1, sale of buildings 2 as columns going left to right to see, okay, here's Eastmore High School, this is a project for Eastmore High School, and here are the various funding sources that are going to take care of these projects. And any one of these columns, I could take building name and drag it to the left, and then it sorts everything by building name, and you can see building name, projects, first of all the fiscal year projects together, and then the various names of the projects. Or I could put it building name, then I can put put the project in there, and then fiscal year, and say, well, geez, we're doing HVAC, but we're doing this one in 17-18, this one in 18-19. You know, so any way you want this flipped and sorted, once we've got this data, just let me know. It works out.
Okay.
Are you thinking just this account, the 03-300, and then like a spreadsheet across there, or?
Yeah.
So.
Well, if that's the account, but it seems to be.
We have a lot of.
Seems to be all.
And it's one,
Operation Fix It.
oh yeah, this is all I did for here. This is all I did, I think, for here.
So what does PM stand for?
Preventative maintenance, I think.
That's a shop name.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I just curious.
Now, here's the other beautiful thing if you really want, and I know we're really out of time. This is in an Excel spreadsheet. And if you wanted to, we could do it live. We could actually sit, if you wanted to go through an exercise and do it live, till we got it presented in a way that you want it one way, you want it another way, we need it another.
Well, do you think maybe the next board meeting, I mean, the next finance meeting, since June should be somewhat light, we could just kind of go over those different scenarios live with the committee?
I think it's great.
I'll get some more detail. I'm gonna push Maurice and Annette and their team to get me some more detail.
So Maurice and Annette, everybody, like, bravo.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Bravo.
I'm really sorry for being such a pest on this too. Thank you so much.
No.
I mean, this is really fantastic.
What I'd like to do, if we did, what I would suggest is maybe we do that in June, and then I'd look to everybody. I think it's then, what do we do to use to inform the public, let them know there's info, just as we're doing updates. There was the board was asking about updates on Operation Fix It at the last board meeting. And I think that connecting and aligning that with, hey, it's not only that, but we have other things that we can then periodically monitor, and talk about capital expenditures. It's good.
Yeah, this was a, to say it was a team effort is an understatement. But I couldn't do this without data. I got some pretty good at analytical tools, so I could take their data and put it together, and it's just a combination of having a half a dozen or more sets of eyes on this to pull it all together. I'm not totally satisfied with the layout of this. I would like to see it, some consistent formatting, layout, colorization, all of that. I'm kind of a visual.
It's a first run. I mean, this is great.
I would say, keep doing that part, but don't let the great get in the way of the good. But the second is what can we do, how do we do this now that we're beginning to inform the
Sure.
community about.
And I appreciate you letting me hog the
staff
time. We
personnel.
invited Maurice and Annette to be here in case there were some detailed questions, but I thought it was very important to get the form of all of this and kind of just a general substance feel. And now we can.
We've got the
Stan-
data, now how are we gonna present the data?
Stan, if they're late for supper, they can say that it's your fault.
It is. Well, my wife's in the parking lot because I told her that I would be out. I'd be out at 5:45. So that's who dinged me. I'm pretty
Well,
sure.
she would
I don't even
know.
have to look, and I'm sure it's probably my wife wondering why we haven't left for dinner yet. So, but I think this is great. I'm very pleased with where we've come so far. And I have to say, probably more than the output is all the teamwork that goes together to put this together. There's no resistance. We've got a goal. What do we have to do to bring all the parts together? I love working with Maurice's team and the guys on our floor and
Everyone we have here, I mean,
it's a lot of stuff. I chuckle. I poked Dewan a little bit, but I chuckled. Boy, he came in. I said, "Do you have it in the spreadsheet?" "Oh yeah," and he just boom, emailed it to me, and I'm like,
That's awesome.
"This is laid out. And it's perfect to use." So it's really
Just to
good.
piggyback one of the beauty of that, there's a lot of information that all of our teams have that we use as part of our everyday work. And so some people don't really realize, if it's part of your everyday work, it's not something you really celebrate, if you will. And so I'm glad he had the opportunity to share that information. Mr. Hood is fairly new to the district.
Yes.
But it's good he was able to share that information, so.
I would only ask is maybe as the team gets back together, go through and fine tune, think about what would you suggest that would be helpful for the board, but also for the community to understand. Again, I think it's always this started out because folks would say, we don't know how much you spend on each building, and one building gets more than another, and then it's about weighing, so the board can look at that and understand that, and not only understand the differences, but why those differences there.
Well, for next month then, do you want to go then over a couple of those different sort of looks? So we could do that. I know we're going to have some other things. What month are we in? May? We always have more things that we could be looking at. I apologize, but I know we did want to look at some personnel budget first looks, in the future and how that would look. Another big task. But maybe we could, we can meet up again, Stan, you and I and your folks, talk about that, but maybe continue to look at this. This is fantastic stuff. And then at the next meeting then, when everyone's here, I do want to have a discussion then to make a recommendation to possibly add 2 ex officio members to the committee that would be represented by OPC and CEA. And there's a larger conversation as well, because I know CEA has a lot of activities on Thursdays. So, thinking of next year in August, we would, to get everyone there, is there some flexibility in maybe changing finance to a different day? Monday, Friday morning, Monday afternoon. We'll have to discuss that internally. You guys all have things that you have regularly scheduled, but I do want to be accommodating. I want to make sure that our partners in labor are here when we have these important discussions and have the opportunity.
Maybe not here, but invited.
Invited, absolutely. That's what this is about, to open up the doors. What we do this for is to be open and transparent what we're doing, and I really want them here. So, thank you. This has been fantastic.
I'll look at the charter.
Yeah.
I'll look at the charter.
Okay.
Okay.
Aaron, I got you.
It's 5:55.
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, so moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same signs.
Aye.
We're adjourned.